In this week's Marvel Snap Decks of the Week, we have 10 unique deck lists, all of which have been crafted using a variety of different sources and statistics to ensure that you're getting the best decks in Marvel Snap. With that being said, be sure to hit the like button if you'd like to support the series. It's all that YouTube cares about, and I would appreciate it tremendously as we start our discussion about the first deck of the week, which is going to involve Nebula. Now, Nebula has proven to be a fantastic card. I think it's very strong. It's a great Season Pass card that's borderline plug and playable into so many decks, even the ones we're going to talk about today. Now, there's one deck that truly stands amongst the rest with a mid 65% win rate right now, which is absolutely insane, and it is a Nebula Miracle style deck. Essentially what you're doing here is it is a little expensive from a card perspective because you do have Stature, you do have Black Bolt, you do have Darkhawk, and of course Jeff is in here as well. If you don't have Jeff, Nightcrawler is a good option, as Nightcrawler will provide you with an opportunity to move, which will proc the Miles Morales. The core concept behind this deck is not only to provide you with some counterplay against Galactus with Polaris, so you can pull the Yondu into the Galactus kind of playing lane and stuff their play, but essentially you're having this Miracle turn 6 where you play Black Bolt on turn 5, which allows your Stature to be 1 cost, and then what you do is with either Jeff or with Polaris or Nightcrawler, you move the Jeff, and then Spider-Man Miles Morales becomes a 1 cost as well. So you have a 1 cost 5 in Spider-Man Morales, you have a 1 cost 7 in Stature, and then you can play whatever else you have. If you've played Darkhawk, you can Rock Slide to pump up your Darkhawk while putting 6 power on the board. It doesn't matter, you have a ton of options. You can even Shang-Chi because again, 4 power plus the additional 2 for the Stature and the Miles Morales. It's a tremendous deck that has a ton of flexibility and has extremely powerful turn 6 plays. Doing my best to get you guys some decks that help you gain rank and take people by surprise. This is one of the higher win rate decks with a low play rate, which basically tells me that it's kind of flying under the radar. And Nebula Sandman is actually a really capable list because you have natural synergy with Nebula and Sandman because Sandman restricts the ability to play per turn. And Nebula, if it's out early and your opponent is forced to just keep repeatedly playing to that location, they're just going to lose everywhere else because of Sandman, right? So Sandman and Nebula have very natural synergy. This deck does feature Jeff, which is of course a Series 5 card, but it kind of works through the Electro and Sandman function. You have your natural progression of Arrow, Doctor Doom, Odin, Magneto as well. You could consider playing Chavez if you want to improve the consistency of Electro Wave. One thing worth noting is if you don't have Jeff, Professor X feels a little riskier even if you do have the Daredevil. However, what's worth noting here is that Daredevil in this package allows you to play a confident Professor X, and of course Jeff allows you to play into the Professor X location. In the event you play it, say, on turn 4, because you've Electroed on turn 3, and you whiff on that. You have that extra play with Jeff to kind of make up that difference. So ultimately, I do think that Nebula Sandman is an interesting deck list. One thing worth noting though is there is some counter synergy with Professor X and Doctor Doom and Odin because Doctor Doom's Doom bots cannot access the Professor X location. Only Jeff can. Sera Miracle remains one of the absolute best decks in the meta, simply from a standpoint that it just has an answer to pretty much everything. You are against Devil Dinosaur and Darkhawk, well, you got Enchantress. You're against a Nebula that's getting out of hand, well, you've got your Killmonger Nova package. You just have answers. And of course, you have the Mysterio Hitmonkey package as well. This is one of those deck lists that honestly is just extremely consistent to play. You have your turn 5 Sera, and then you have an unlimited number of answers. It's crazy what this deck can do. It also has the Polaris for the counterplay against Galactus, and overall, I really think that this deck is very strong. It's one of the absolute go-tos if you're looking to get to Infinite, and remains a top-tier contender from both a win rate and a cube rate perspective. I feel like I've been talking about discard for weeks now, and finally it's really starting to take hold of the meta. Now, we have classic discard this week, and I have a caveat here. I actually think the deck I showed you last week is easier and more fun to pilot, while this deck is a little more RNG centric. However, the stats don't lie. Across a number of different sources, this deck on average has a 4% higher win rate than the deck I showed you last week. Although I personally enjoy piloting the other one more. This one has the traditional discard mechanics of Swordmaster or Hell Cow. I mean, you play the Dracula and you just discard the crap out of everything and just pump that Apocalypse as high as you can, and that's basically the strategy here. The hope is that you have a swarm that gets replicated a ton of times with Hell Cow, Swordmaster, and others. You just flood the board with swarms. It's a very fascinating deck. So you have a couple options with discard, and I wanted to show you this one because it's very classic, and the one last week I still really enjoy playing, But it's worth noting here as well, by the way, if you can actually take out Sunspot for Nebula if you wish, and it's like still fantastic. This is a great deck, and I think it's worth turning to if you're looking to experiment with discard. Another week goes by, and Doomwave continues to be one of the best decks in the meta. Quietly, it still remains an absolute god tier option because you have that turn 5 wave. Turn 5 wave decks are absolutely unbelievable. They're giving you an opportunity to completely shut down Sera Miracle style decks. They can play 2 cards, not like 5, right? But it destroys Hitmonkey. It destroys a lot of these like really combo-centric turn 6 plays while giving you the opportunity to play, you know, She-Hulk Doctor Doom, She-Hulk Arrow, while getting additional scouting with White Queen, while having Shang-Chi for anybody going really vertical with Devil Dinosaur or Darkhawk. It's just a damn good deck. I like the idea here of owning initiative with Lizard. It's also worth noting here that variations of this deck where you take Sunspot out and add Nebula are also a good choice. Although in this case, what I would actually prefer you do is I would prefer to take out Iceman for the Nebula because you want Sunspot for that turn 5 skip. You're going to be running some additional mana here, and it just makes it worth it. But ultimately, it's up to you. Iceman is very good against the combo-centric decks. It can also impact Galactus negatively if you hit the Electro, stuff like that, or the Doc Ock. So, like, there's a toss-up between Iceman and Sunspot for Nebula, but otherwise, still a very consistent deck. Speak of the devil, I know you guys don't want me to talk about Galactus, but you know what? It's still a really viable deck. You're not getting 8 cubes. You might get 4 with a good snap if they're getting a little greedy themselves. But realistically, if you want a very steady climb to the higher ranks, Galactus will get you your cube or 2 on a very consistent basis. Now, there's a ton of things that go wrong, and this is something that comes up in the comments all the time. People complain about Galactus, but realistically, like, there's locations that mess up Galactus. There's cards galore like that mess up Galactus. I mean, I'm putting Polaris in tons of decks because Yondu comes out, and then we're gonna pull the Yondu to deny the Galactus play. But ultimately, Galactus still remains a very solid deck, especially if you have Null. If you can get out that early Doc Ock, or if you set up a board state with that Hobgoblin into the turn 5 or 6 Galactus, especially with Spider-Man, like when you shut down the location. I mean, it's a very oppressive deck, and you can kind of see why people hate playing against it. But still, it's in the meta, and it's worth playing if you're looking to rank up. Rocks and Hawks, as popularized by my main man Cozy Snap, still represents a very good deck in the meta. Now, it got kind of pulled back a little bit thanks to the buff to Enchantress. Enchantress is finding itself into more deck lists. The result is Rocks and Hawks can feel a little riskier. However, it still represents a very strong deck. If they don't have the right answers, or if they don't have Shang-Chi and Enchantress, which most decks will, you still get extremely vertical. You also have the options of course, having Doctor Doom going wide. You have the opportunity to use Mystique on turn 6 in conjunction with Darkhawk, so you basically pump up their hand in their deck with Rock Slide, and then on turn 6 you Darkhawk Mystique, which reduces the chance that they can anticipate your play with a Shang-Chi. So there's a couple different options here, and of course you have the turn 5 Devil Dinosaur into Mystique +1, especially if you have Zabu on the board. So it's a very fascinating deck. It has a lot of options here. It has also the Agent Coulson, which I love. It's just a great deck that's worth playing. Its win rate has come down a little bit considering the popularity of Enchantress, but it's still one that you can turn to if you enjoy the playstyle. If Rocks and Hawks isn't for you, we still have another Devil Dinosaur deck worth considering, and that's Devil Dino Control. The control element here is actually pretty interesting with the Daredevil and Professor X package. There is a potential upgrade with Jeff the Shark here as well. You could consider taking out something like Iceman, although Iceman is really valuable in the current meta because of the amount of Miracle-style decks out there, with Sera Monkey being as popular as it is. I like the Zabu and the Moon Girl kind of iteration here, especially when you consider that you can get multiple Spider-Mans, which can completely shut down a location. I like the opportunity to play Devil Dinosaur. Mystique's an upgrade here as well, but when you have Moon Girl, you often don't need Mystique because you can have multiple Devil Dinosaurs. So you have the option of playing Moon Girl and then Devil Dinosaur on turn 5 and Devil Dinosaur on turn 6 as well. With Zabu, you can actually Moon Girl on turn 3, and then you can do something like White Queen on turn 4 as well, in conjunction with your Quinjet, Iceman, or whatever else you have. A lot of versatility in this deck, and it has a very strong win rate for a reason. Here's an experimental deck list that's kind of on the rise. This is something that a lot of people aren't going to be expecting, and it is Dracula Zoo. There's a couple things working for you here. You got the Kazara Scroll Go combo, which I absolutely love. You got the Zero Lizard, which is absolutely fantastic. You have the Cosmo, which is for the anti-Galactus players out there. You got to have an answer for Galactus. But of course, the key thing here is you got Dracula, which is kind of the namesake of the deck. Now, this particular list does not run Chavez. I tend to prefer Chavez in these kind of decks because with Chavez, you never have to play the game of, do I skip turn 5 with Sunspot and then not pull Infinite on 6? Because if you don't have Infinite by turn 5 with Chavez, you kind of get it. But this is technically the highest win rate edition of the deck. The reason for this is because when Dracula procs, if it hits Red Skull, you get the 12 power, none of the downside. If it hits Destroyer, that's perfect. If it hits Infinite, you're just winning. But the nice thing here is that with Cosmo and Armor, Destroyer has an interesting role to play. This is a very strong turn 6 play as a 15 with countermeasures in Armor and Cosmo. So you got a lot of options here. I mean, theoretically, you could even zero the Destroyer if you really want to, if the play pattern allows it. Regardless, Dracula Zoo provides you with an opportunity to kind of snipe a big card with Dracula while having a very wide board state with Khazar and the 1-drops. Silver Surfer has got to be the most slept on archetype in Marvel Snap. I thought it was discard, but at least discard's catching up here. But like, I never play people playing Silver Surfer. I play Silver Surfer myself and I love it. This is great. And honestly, the package of Nova Killmonger is completely dismantling Nebulas. Nebula's a great card, but if you don't armor it, you're asking to get Killmongered. Nebula in this list is actually pretty good too, but with the popularity of the card right now, you're going to gain more cubes with Killmonger because you're going to want to counter everyone else playing the card. Honestly, Scorpion is awesome. You got the Brood play as well. It's as stock Silver Surfer as you can get. Sera turn 5, and then you have your Miracle play on turn 6, which could include Maximus. You have the Polaris for the anti-Galactus play. Juggernaut also does the same for Galactus as well. Goose also counters Galactus as well. And of course, you have the Storm Juggernaut combination to lock down a location. If you hate Galactus, play this deck, you're going to absolutely clap their cheeks. And the other thing that you should clap is the like button. And you can also watch the next video that's down below if you're interested in watching more Marvel Snap content. Thank you guys so much for your support, and we'll see you in that next Marvel Snap video.